This case takes place on the 28th of November 1994 in the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, USA. Jeffrey Dahmer is likely someone you have already heard of, especially in light of the new Netflix series. But as a quick overview, Jeffrey Dahmer was a serial killer serving 15 consecutive life sentences for the savage murders of 15 men during a 13-year period. Dahmer, who lived in Milwaukee, murdered at least 17 men, most of which were young, gay African Americans. He would have a routine to get the men back to his apartment, where he would promise to pay them if they would pose nude for photographs. Once they were in his home, he would insist they have a drink, which, unbeknown to them, was laced with drugs. Once they passed out, he would strangle them and be with the corpse for some time before mutilating and eating their bodies. When police raided his apartment after his arrest, they found various body parts, such as a human head, in the freezer. Dahmer was finally arrested on the 22nd of July 1991. He confessed to 15 of the murders but entered a plea of guilty by insanity. At his trial in February of 1992, the jury did not believe him and found him sane for each murder. Although he could not be given the death penalty as it was abolished in Wisconsin in 1853, he was to serve the rest of his life behind bars. In prison, there were fears for Dahmer's safety. Rita Isabel was the sister of Errol Lindsay, who was one of Dahmer's last victims. She said she had envisaged his demise for some time. For 2 years, she said she had been getting phone calls from inmates who were in prison with Dahmer. In these phone calls, the inmates said that he would be taken care of. And in one call, an inmate said, "You don't know me, but I'm in prison with Jeffrey. Don't worry, we'll take care of it." In relation to these calls, Rita would later say, "I wouldn't say I wanted it to happen like this, but Jeffrey tore up my family." The prison staff also feared for Dahmer's safety. Being one of the most notorious killers of all time put a target on his back, and staff believed that whichever convict killed him could earn an honored place in the prison world. Dahmer spent his first year in prison under protective isolation. But after this, it was deemed he was safe to go into the general population with the other 622 inmates. Not long after leaving protective isolation, the first attempt on his life was made. An inmate had a shank and tried to slash Dahmer's neck. Although this attempt on his life was unsuccessful, and the prison staff believed this to be an isolated incident, and so he was kept with the general population. However, 2 years later, Dahmer would meet his demise at the hands of inmate Christopher Scarver on the 28th of November 1994. Like Dahmer, Christopher entered the prison around the same time in 1992. He was originally serving a life sentence for the 1990 murder of Steve Lohman. Christopher was the oldest of 5 children and grew up in a rough neighborhood where he fell victim to severe racism. This affected him deeply. He dropped out of high school in the 11th grade due to poor academic performance and discipline issues. Christopher enrolled in a carpentry apprenticeship at the Wisconsin Conservation Corps work program. Being a high school dropout, he believed this was his best chance at full-time employment, and this was even promised to him by the then program leader Edward Patz upon the completion of his course. However, Patz was soon fired before Christopher could complete the course, and the job never materialized. Around this time, Christopher had been drinking heavily and was a daily cannabis smoker. He had also started listening to a voice inside his head which had declared itself as the chosen one. The voice had told him to return to the training center and confront them about his supposed job. On the 1st of June 1990, Christopher did return. He found 27-year-old Stephen Lohman, who had replaced Pat, and the site manager, John Fayen. Christopher demanded money and quickly pulled out his gun and pointed it at Lohman. But when Lohman could only offer Christopher $15, Christopher flew into a fit of rage and shot Lohman in the head. This killed him instantly, but Christopher decided to shoot his body multiple times. In a desperate bid to save his life, Fayen gave Christopher a $3,000 check and his credit card. Thankfully, he was able to escape with his life when Christopher went to go and check on the body of Lohman. Shortly after this, Christopher was arrested, and in his possession he had the gun, check, and cash from the attack. He had been kicked out of his mother's house for his alcohol abuse, and had recently discovered that he was going to become a father, and now he was being arrested for murder. He was later sentenced to life for the murder of Steve Lohman, and when speaking of his crimes, he said that he knew what he did was wrong, but he did not know why he snapped the way he did. He had not previously been in trouble with the law and had no prior convictions. He was later diagnosed with schizophrenia after complaining of experiencing delusions. In 1992, he arrived at the Columbia Institution where he would come into contact with Dahmer. Although they did not speak in prison, Dahmer's notoriety meant that he became a target for Christopher, who later admitted that he carried newspaper clippings of the crimes of Dahmer, which would repulse and anger him. He also claimed that Dahmer would offend other inmates. While most inmates would be repentant about committing such crimes, Dahmer was not. In fact, Christopher claims that Dahmer would play pranks in his Milwaukee cannibal persona, where he would shape food into body parts and squirt ketchup on them to mimic the blood and eat them. There are also rumors that Dahmer had a Cannibals Anonymous meeting poster in his cell, and when guards would go and cuff him, he would warn them that he bites. Although these claims are denied by Gerald Boyle, who defended Dahmer in court. He said, "He killed people, but he didn't taunt people. I never saw him do anything that would lead me to believe that he would mimic the deaths he caused. I just don't believe that." Maybe what Gerald said is true, but I think it's worth mentioning that at school, Dahmer would play practical jokes and do impressions of people in a goofy way. So much in fact that the kids at school coined the phrase, "doing a Dahmer." Perhaps shaping his food into body parts was his way of trying to be accepted by the other inmates. On the morning of the 28th of November 1994, just 2 years into his 15 consecutive life sentences, Jeffrey Dahmer had been assigned to clean the gym, along with Christopher and another inmate named Jesse Anderson, who had been serving a life sentence for killing his wife. At this point, Christopher had been taking heavy medication, as the voices in his head were becoming out of control. The guards had left the 3 inmates unattended in the gym showers for 20 minutes. Christopher said he felt provoked. One of the men poked him in the back while he was cleaning, and he said he turned around to see the 2 of them laughing under their breath. He would later say, "I looked right into their eyes, but I couldn't tell which one had done it." When Jesse went into a different room, Christopher picked up a 20-inch metal bar weighing 5 pounds from the weights room, and then followed him in. He bludgeoned Jesse and left him for dead before turning his attention to Dahmer. He confronted Dahmer about the crimes he had committed, and asked him, "Did you really do those things?" To which Dahmer replied yes. Christopher added that Dahmer appeared to be shocked and started looking for the door pretty quickly. Christopher blocked the exit and began to strike Dahmer repeatedly. After the attack, Christopher walked slowly back to his cell. As he passed a prison guard, he said, "God told me to do it. Jesse Anderson and Jeffrey Dahmer are both dead." At 8:10 a.m., guards found Dahmer lying on the floor of the gym bathroom with extreme head injuries. He had been hit repeatedly in the face with the iron bar, and his head had also been slammed against the wall multiple times. Although he was found alive, he died an hour later in hospital. Eerily, he did not make a sound during any of the attack. Jesse Anderson also had severe head wounds and died in hospital 2 days later. The motives behind the killings are not fully understood, and there are multiple opinions. One opinion is that the killings were due to racial tensions. This is because many of Dahmer's victims were young black men, and Jesse Anderson had attempted to pin the murder of his wife on 2 black men. But the law does not officially think that the murders were racially motivated. Another is that the attack was pre-planned. Why did the guard disappear for 20 minutes, leaving a high-risk inmate with a violent psychopath? Christopher has stated that the attacks were not pre-planned, but later admitted that he concealed the iron bar used to kill both men shortly before the killings. Christopher himself has said he killed Dahmer not because of the twisted, sadistic nature of his crimes, but because when he looked into Dahmer's eyes he seemed unrepentant about it. He even said he made jokes about the crimes he committed. After finding out about her son's death, Joyce Dahmer responded to the media by saying, "Now, is everybody happy? Now that he's been bludgeoned to death, is that good enough for everyone?" The victims' families also had mixed reactions. Some were joyous and celebrated, but others felt an injustice. Catherine Lacey, the mother of Oliver Lacey, said, "The hurt is worse now, because he is not suffering like us." The district attorney who prosecuted Dahmer said that it was important that Christopher did not become a folk hero, stating that Dahmer's death was still a murder. After being arrested for the double murder, Christopher used his history with mental illness as a reason to plead insanity. He declared himself the chosen one after killing his first victim, Lohman, and also claimed the voices were telling him to do it. With this taken into account, he was treated with antipsychotic medication and had spent a period of time in the mental health wing of the hospital. In the case of Dahmer and Anderson, Christopher was deemed sane and fit to stand trial. Later, he changed his plea to no contest. In exchange for being transferred to a federal penitentiary, he was given an extra 2 life sentences. Dahmer had stated in a will that he wished for no services to be conducted and that he wished to be cremated. In September of 1995, Dahmer's body was cremated and the ashes were split between his mother and father. After the murders, Christopher continued to live in torturous existence. He claimed that he spent over a decade in solitary confinement in a cell with no windows, which reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer. Christopher filed a lawsuit against the state for violating his constitutional right not to be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment. He stated that he had requested to move from the Supermax for 3 years, with the district court determining that conditions at Supermax are so severe and restrictive that they exacerbate the symptoms that a mentally ill inmate exhibit. Many of the severe conditions serve no legitimate benefit. They can only be considered punishment for punishment's sake. However, due to Christopher's mental health and attempts to take his own life, it was argued that no deliberate attempt to cause him undue distress and exacerbate his mental illness was intended. Things like the lights being left on 24/7 in his room was for his own safety, and the removal of items was so he did not injure himself. Based on this, the case was thrown out of court despite backup from other inmates. After the death of Dahmer, the Oxford apartments where Dahmer lived and killed 12 of his victims was torn down, and the site has remained vacant even to this day, even though there have been various plans over the decades to build a memorial park in the memory of the victims. Oddly, 11 of the victims' families have sued for damages and were awarded Dahmer's estate, and there was to be an auction of his estate led by Thomas J. Jacobson, who was the lawyer for 8 of the victims' families. This caused controversy, as people at the time could not understand why any of these items would go up for sale. The items included an 80-quart aluminium kettle, heavy-duty chemical-resistant gloves, a handsaw, blades, cuffs, a 57-gallon drum, and the refrigerator in which the victims' body parts were found. The victims' families wanted to auction off the items for $1 million. Stephen Tuwami was one of the victims. His sister was against the auction and stated, "It's never going to be over for us. I still have unopened birthday presents from 10 years ago. The memories are still there." Eventually, in light of not wanting Dahmer's memory to live on, a civic group known as Milwaukee Civic Pride was quickly established, and they raised funds to purchase and destroy Dahmer's possessions. The group quickly raised over $500,000, with $100,000 coming from the real estate magnate Joseph Zilber, who stated he wanted nobody to see this freak show. 8 of the 11 families agreed to the deal, receiving $32,000 each, and Dahmer's possessions were destroyed or sent to undisclosed landfills in Illinois. Although some people have said that they already have some of Dahmer's belongings. A family friend said that he and Jeffrey Dahmer's father took a lava lamp, black dinnerware, a meat tenderizer, bikini underwear, a bed, and other items from Dahmer's apartment after he was arrested. which raised a debate whether or not it was wrong for the victims' families to try and benefit in some way after the loss that was forced upon them.